Okay, well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening for a decade-long race against disability discrimination. Tonight's Zoom is dedicated in memory of Benjamin Brown by Erica Tannenbaum and Effie Reinhardt, very appropriately dedicated in his memory. And I begin this Zoom, as we do all of our gatherings, by first and foremost joining our community in praying for the refuah shlema for all those who are ill during this time period, whether from corona or any other illness. We are with you and with your families and hope that we hear good news from you soon. And for all those that have lost loved ones during this period of time, we stand with you as a community and we comfort you. And we hope to be able to share happy times ahead together as we are on the eve of Purim. So we do hope that happy times are coming soon for all of us. I am very excited, as I know many of you on here this evening, to join together with this very, very special group. We are so proud this evening to be hosting a Zoom focused on disabilities, specifically during Jewish Disabilities Awareness Month. We are even prouder that the three people speaking this evening are Ramaz alumni who have literally set the standard for what we reference in the Ramaz mission statement as answering the call. That is the call of God, and performing his work each day. They each have dedicated themselves to helping improve the lives of people who can easily be overlooked or less focused upon. Each of our speakers have had the examples set before them by their amazing parents, Jules Lassner of blessed memory, and Danielle Gorlin Lassner. May she continue to be healthy and grace us with her wonderful personality and all that comes along with that. And Benjamin Brown of blessed memory and Fran Brown, who have worked and continues to work tirelessly for the Ramaz KJ community and the entire community of people who have experienced spinal cord injuries. It is an amazing, amazing opportunity to hear from these kinds of people and to understand the depths of what you will hear about this evening. So our first person who will be the moderator this evening is Jamie Lassner, class of '82. For about 22 years after graduating with a degree in finance from Baruch, Jamie worked as an executive in positions in international commodity trading. And then on top of that, he was also a volunteer medical technician, an EMT, and has been since 1986. He helped numerous people in this and many other communities. And he was injured during the September 11th attacks on the World Trade Center. He decided to change his career and work with adolescents in schools. And for 6 years, he was the director of student life for a K-8 private school. Since 2019, he joined and has been serving as the executive director and board member of Friends of Access Israel. Friends of Access Israel strives to globally improve accessibility and inclusion for people with disabilities and the elderly using advocacy, education, and inclusion. Jamie is the proud father of two wonderful Ramaz alumni, Sam and Adam, and the husband of our outstanding Ramaz professional, Mara Lassner. Alan T. Brown, class of '85. He has earned his honorary degree many times over. Alan Brown is director of new partner engagement and at the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation, and a board member of Friends of Access Israel. He was injured in 1988 at the age of 20 when his neck was crushed by an ocean wave at a Club Med in Martinique. The accident caused a C5-6 spinal cord injury and left Alan a quadriplegic with no movement below his chest. Since the accident, Alan and his family have, through the Alan T. Brown Foundation to Cure Paralysis, provided support, education, and advocacy for paralysis communities. Initially, the focus for the foundation was on finding a cure for paralysis, a magic bullet that would help everyone living with paralysis to walk again. However, in time, the focus of the Alan T. Brown Foundation changed to the quality of life after paralysis and became a resource for topics personally and professionally on how to adjust to a new life post-injury. Today, the Alan T. Brown Foundation has merged with the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation, working to improve lives and extend the reach and impact of his message to the paralysis community. And finally, Daniel Brown, class of '89. Daniel is a partner in the Shepard Mullen business trial practice in the firm's New York City office, and more notably, he is the head of the firm's pro bono practice. Dan's expertise in complex commercial litigation and arbitration covers a very wide range of areas and industries and includes the defense of individuals and class actions. His major focus is on the Americans with Disability Act. Dan has been the recipient of numerous awards, including the American Bar Association's 2015 Pro Bono Publico Award, which honors individuals that have enhanced the human dignity of others by improving or delivering volunteer legal services to our nation's poor and disadvantaged. Daniel represents so many of the best parts of Ramaz. And on top of everything else that the three wonderful gentlemen have in common, they all helped Ramaz many times over in their hockey championships. And so I have to shout them all out for all that they've done, but also recognize that they also well represent the hockey players of the Ramaz community. In seriousness, it is such an honor and privilege to have you with us tonight. I look forward to hearing, as all the people on this evening, and there are many of you, have this opportunity to hear from you. And please, Jamie, take it away.
Thank you, Kenny. It is a humbling honor to be on this Zoom with the children of Marty Rockland, of Benji Brown. Benji Brown, Marty Rockland, my father, Sandy Eisenstadt, and the Ramaz community made us who we are. Greetings to our Ramaz family. As Kenny mentioned, February is Jewish Disability Awareness and Inclusion Month. It is a unified effort among Jewish organizations and communities worldwide to raise awareness and foster inclusion of people with disabilities and those who adore them. It is also a call to action to each one of us in accordance with our Jewish values, the ones we learned at Ramaz, honoring the gifts and strengths that we all possess. Friends of Access Israel this morning completed a daily Zoomcast featuring people from all over the world on the subject of awareness and inclusion. It is with that we begin our presentation tonight. So I open up with Alan asking how you became a founder and I became a co-founder of Friends of Access Israel and how Ramaz is involved with that.
So first of all, Kenny, thank you for the very kind words, and to everybody, very glad to be here with all my Ramaz family and KJ family. This actually all started in the mayor's office in New York City when Michal Moquet, who was in Josh Lookstein class, was at a meeting with Victor Calisi, who's the commissioner for disabilities for the city of New York. And he asked me if I would be able to join the meeting. I was not able to be there in person, but I joined on the phone. And at the end of the meeting, Michal said to Maggie Goldberg from the Christopher Reeve Foundation, "Is that Alan Brown that went to Ramaz?" And they said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, this is the reason I do what I do, is because I remember when he got hurt." And I had no idea, and that led to me going over to Israel a couple of times to be part of Access Israel and seeing the amazing work that they do. And then seeing what they do in Israel, that we needed to do something to make that bigger. And that was starting Friends of Access Israel and bringing it here to the United States and around the world.
That's basically it in a nutshell. I do remember Alan sending pictures from Israel, talking about how Israel has become the accessible nation. which is mind-boggling considering that we have thousands and thousands of years of history. Jerusalem is fully accessible. If you want to go visit any of the holy sites, it is accessible. I want to go now on to the subject of inclusion, and with that, we have a slide, and where the subject matter starts. Alan, you and I trained for the New York City Marathon in 1991. Here are some pictures. The one with the white hat in the background is Benji Brown. I'm wearing a purple jacket, and Alan is wearing black and in a chair, and his runner is next to him. We trained together. Can you explain why you needed an EMT by your side for most of the race?
First, I want to start off why I did the New York City Marathon.
Okay.
And that was actually because of your brother. And I remember many a days in Central Park with your father and Andy being the youngest person to run the New York City Marathon at the time, and to have Andy's Hill right near the boat pond named after him. So remember as a kid just going over the First Avenue and then back into the park when the marathon was, you know, in its infancy, and knowing it was something I always wanted to do. And when I broke my neck in 1988 and came back, it was a bucket list, something I felt that I needed to do. Easier said than done as a quadriplegic. The reason I needed an EMT, which is where Jamie came into play, was as a quadriplegic, I cannot control my body temperature. I do not sweat. I have trouble with fluids. I would go do a 15, 20-mile push in the park and wouldn't sweat until, you know, 3-4 hours afterwards. And then Haskel would have to come and take me down to Lenox Hill and fill me back up and take me home. Lots of training in Central Park, up and down the hills. Every Sunday, Jamie, you and I did a race. Daniel, you were part of one of the most famous races where I think I got my biggest trophy up in the Bronx. But really just something that I felt that I needed to do to prove to myself that this injury was not bigger than me and that I can overcome. And it was the first big hurdle that I overcame after my accident.
And indeed a memorable hurdle. The second marathon that you did, unbeknownst to everybody, somewhere around mile 18, you broke your wrist. Unbeknownst to you, you broke your wrist. And you finished the marathon, and we noticed swelling, and the rest is history. So let's go back, if we can, to 91. The feeling of being on the Verrazano Bridge. We started very early.
Yeah, it was kind of eerie back then. I mean, this was 1991, and they started us about 5 or 6 hours before the race even started. So I was going through the streets of Brooklyn, dodging traffic, basically. Being on the bridge alone was very surreal. There were not a lot of wheelchair athletes back then. There were, you know, a handful of us. But it was just, you know, knowing that I had not just one bridge to climb, but 5 to climb. It was the beginning of many bridges that I would climb in my life. And I look at everything as being a hurdle that can be overcome in one way, shape, or form. And it's just a matter of how we conquer it. And I knew I was going to do it that day. And, you know, taping my hands up and, you know, my hands are my sneakers. And just, you know, breaking my wrist, not even feeling that was kind of crazy until afterwards when we saw it kind of hanging there. And nothing will ever stop me. I think that anybody who knows me on this call knows that I'm kind of unbreakable. And I will do that not for me. I do it to lead by example to help others. And that's something that I learned very young and I keep with me near and dear to my heart.
So my recollection of that day is obviously the picture of you by yourself on the bridge and me walking the bike up because you were going at a snail's pace going up, and then having to find you somewhere in Brooklyn, basically saying goodbye to me on the way down because you had no sense of slowing down. You just wanted to keep going. I want to just break to Daniel for a second. Daniel, during all this, you came to some races with us. After Ramaz, where'd you go to college, and how did you decide to become a lawyer?
So I always wanted to be a lawyer from when I used to stay home from school to watch Perry Mason. And then I graduated and went to University of Michigan and to Fordham Law School.
And then we do have to bring this to everybody's attention. Daniel, this evening you're wearing a tie and jacket. Why are you wearing a tie and jacket?
Because my mother would kill me if I didn't wear a tie and jacket, but also because, as someone said when we were setting up, and I'm so grateful to the people who sponsored this in honor of my father. But as I've gotten older and just turned 50 last week, I have happily become my father, and he always wore a jacket and tie.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear on that. Alan, you've done 5 boroughs, you enter Manhattan, you get to 102nd Street entrance of Central Park. What happens?
A police officer grabs the back of my wheelchair as I'm getting ready to enter that uphill to get into Central Park. And I was trying to figure out like what the heck was going on, because at that point in time, you've hit your wall and you're just kind of in the zone, wanting to hit Tavern on the Green and be done with this whole thing. And a police officer grabbed my chair and broke my momentum. And then, as Kenny kind of brought up earlier, a little bit of a hockey player came out at me, where I was like, what's going on here? And he's like, you are not allowed to enter the park until the lead runners pass you, because that's the rules. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'll freeze to death out here. You can't do this. So I threw a little bit of an elbow, and it got a little bit ugly, and he finally let me go, and I finished. And that was kind of the beginning of what took place with Daniel. So I'm going to just kind of lead it right into that, because
so Daniel, you went to college, went to law school, and then you're reading the newspaper. And go ahead, Daniel.
All right, so I'm gonna share my screen, and as Kenny mentioned, I am the pro bono partner at my law firm, and the presentation I'm going to give you is the presentation that I give to our first year lawyers to tell them about my first case as a lawyer and to inspire them to do pro bono work. So as Jamie's just said, here's a picture of Alan in that first race. And I always ask people, what is so strange about this picture? And what's strange about it is that Alan's alone, other than Jamie, who took the picture. And he's alone because they asked him to start the race 5 or 6 hours before the race. And something was wrong with that. You heard Alan just mention nonchalantly, the traffic was still going in the city, and it was really not a great experience because of that. And then the next year, as Jamie just told you, Alan was stopped in Central Park after he broke his wrist. And it was to let the lead women runners finish. And it was, an amazing time, obviously, Alan doing the marathon, but I do remember that. And then, fast forward a bunch of years later, I did go to law school, and I was sitting at my desk, and I read the New York Times, and I read this article right here. Wheelchair athletes get an unwanted break. And the lead said a controversy broke out involving the top wheelchair athletes when all but the first 2 of the wheelchair racers were stopped for 35 minutes. It also said that it was actually the policy of the road runners to let the elite runners through because the race does not have an official wheelchair division. And here were just 2 other quotes that I found very interesting at the time. And remember the names Tom Gorman and Dana Jackson. Dana Jackson worked for the Department of Justice in the Disability Division and called it one of the worst cases of discrimination he's ever seen. So I called Alan and I said, what should we do? And Alan said, why don't you call Bob Hall? So Bob Hall is the person on the left of the screen here in the black and white photo. He's probably the most famous wheelchair racer the first person to do a marathon in a wheelchair. He did it in Boston and then became very well known on the board of the Boston Marathon and the like. And he also made wheelchairs. The wheelchair that Alan used was called, said on it, Hall's Wheels. So I called him up and I said, hey, did you hear what happened at the marathon or read about it in the New York Times? And he said, I have to put you on speakerphone. And he put me on speakerphone, and he had two guys in his office, the two people right here, Miguel Such and Tony Noguera. And while Alan was what we characterized as an amateur athlete, these were professional athletes, wheelchair athletes. Wheelchair athletics are real sports around the world. One day they will be here too. You start to see it on television and the like. And Miguel told me the story that he didn't get stopped in the race because he was too fast, so sort of beat out being stopped. But when he got to the finish line, they didn't want him to break the tape, and they sort of shooed him to the side. And he said, I need to know what my time is. And someone literally said to him, just be happy you're here. We don't know what your time is. These guys are sponsored. It was a real slap in the face, obviously, after doing the marathon. And then Bob Hall said, and Dan, do you know my history with the New York Marathon? And I didn't. And his history with the New York Marathon was that he had applied to do the New York Marathon in the 1970s after doing Boston. And he was rejected by Fred LeBeau of the New York Marathon, of New York Roadrunners Club. He said, we're not going to have wheelchairs here. And Mayor Ed Koch intervened and said, if you don't let Bob race or let people in wheelchairs race in my city, we're not going to have a marathon in this city. So they let him race. There's a whole bunch of stories about what happened to him being targeted by roadrunners after that, having vehicles circling him and other things I won't get into. But what was so interesting, particularly to me as a lawyer, was the fact that Bob sued over this issue, because even though they let him in, they were maintaining their policy. And the case went all the way up to the highest court in New York. And I hope you've all read what's up on the screen here. So this was written in 1980. And I hope it's shocking to read it now. Because as you could see, it was ruled that you were, excuse me, as a matter of law, you were entitled to discriminate against people in sports because tradition and historical, this is a historical race. And it was also interesting that it said the human rights law purpose is not to affect radical rule changes in sports. Now, this was really interesting to me because at this time, there was a difference between when Bob Hall brought his case, and that was the Americans with Disabilities Act had been passed. So there was a new law we could apply to this. So what did I do? I wrote a memo to the partners at my law firm, and I said, there's discrimination going on, and we really need to do something about it. And I put together what really I would call a dream team of plaintiffs. It was Alan and Bob Hall and Dana Jackson, who I mentioned, and someone named Bob Neumeyer. Bob Neumeyer, interestingly, won the New York Marathon maybe 15 or 16 times, the first person to finish it. None of us have ever heard of him before. And that's because there was no wheelchair division, and they really kept the wheelchair division hidden. So what did we do? We filed a lawsuit. It was an amazing time for me. I was a young lawyer, and it was covered extensively by the New York Times. As you could see here, we filed it in November. And we quickly moved for an injunction because the race was upon us before the case was going to be settled. And the racers that year raced with a court-ordered stipulation in case they got pulled over in the middle of the race. It was soon after that race that we settled, and they created the wheelchair division. This is a picture of the Tony Nogueira's the first ever wheelchair number, and just another sort of really cool part about the case, and sort of about discrimination generally, and how non-discrimination benefits everyone. So I had learned in the course of the case that the top wheelchair athletes for many years never came to New York because they knew about this policy of being stopped in the middle of the race, and it was humiliating. And the Roadrunners hired a white shoe law firm to defend themselves, and they defended it like a white shoe law firm would. And when we mediated the case, I was saying to them, like I've said to many of my opponents on disability cases, you know, don't you really just want to do the right thing? It'll benefit everyone. And ultimately, after we did settle the case, interestingly, the lawyer from that firm became the head of the wheelchair division, touting it for many years after. And as you could see here, you know, it's great to see that I was right. As a lawyer, I'm almost always right. And the New York Roadrunners celebrate the wheelchair division now, you know, as much as the regular race. So that is my marathon story.
Thank you, Daniel. Obviously, understand the emotion. We go through the same emotion every time we talk about the marathon and people with disabilities. But I know as we move forward, that one of the things that I learned through Friends of Access Israel is the word disability is somewhat offensive, because growing up, when we grew up, the word to diss somebody was to disrespect them, and you're not looking at the ability they have. I know Alan. We just figured out. I know Alan 50 years. He's the same Alan Brown, more of a troublemaker than he was when we were in Ramaz together. His abilities, his driving, everything is the same. We have thousands of things in common, one thing that is different. And that is the case in all the people that we interviewed this month. We see that these people truly, truly are very much have abilities. I want to turn now to accessibility and interview Alan. And I want to just tell people that for me personally, one of the great things that Alan does is he talks about the issue of accessibility very openly. And the reason he does that is he doesn't do it for Alan Brown. He doesn't do it for the Browns, for the Lassners. He does it for the thousands of people with disabilities. Disabilities represents the largest minority in the world. And Alan is truly one of the spokespersons in the face of disabilities. Alan, a good-looking face, but a face of disabilities. So I want to turn to the next subject, which is accessibility. Let's start with the trip that you took with your son last year. You made a reservation at a hotel. Take it from there. Springfield, Massachusetts. You were going to the Basketball Hall of Fame with your younger son. What happened?
So I went to a Red Sox game the night before, and we're going to check into the hotel in Springfield, Mass. And I travel all the time for work around this country and around the world. And, you know, living with a disability, you need to be extremely organized, and you need to thoroughly think things through in your brain, because you never know what obstacles you're going to run up against. And, you know, living as a quadriplegic, it's kind of living like in a pandemic every day. You never really know what's going to happen to you. So I got to the hotel. I must have called 10 times. You know, this is Alan Brown. I have the reservation. It's the wheelchair accessible room with the roll-in shower. Yes, 2 rooms, blah, blah, blah. I get there, and the person gives me the keys, and he says, we have you covered. I go upstairs, and it was a regular room where I could not get into the shower. And what was really hard was, you know, that was a trip where I was with my son and my younger son, Sam, my 18-year-old. And I try to protect my children from seeing some of the difficult things that I have to overcome as being a parent of somebody with living with a spinal cord injury. And Sam was really upset, and it really, really bothered him knowing that I was going to have trouble going to the bathroom in the morning. I was going to have trouble taking a shower. So I got right on Twitter and started calling out Marriott. And, you know, one thing leads to another. They feel that giving you a free room is making up for you not being able to go to the bathroom and take a shower. But everywhere I travel, the beds are different heights, the showers are different. You know,
Alan,
yes.
you just said something that I know, but others may not know. What does it mean that the bed is at a different height? Why can't it be at a regular height?
So usually everything is kind of done by decorating, but my favorite height of transferring is 24 inches. That's where a wheelchair is, kind of the height for me to transfer evenly across, as opposed to me trying to actually climb up in and out of a bed. So there's no universal standard that really is out there for hotels to go by. So, you know, on one trip where I hit 3 or 4 different hotels, I have different obstacles in every single hotel room I go into. You know, whether it's the bed height, where the couches, things have to be moved. So basically rearranging the room when you get into it to make sure it works for you. And it's part of what I have to deal with about just that's hotel travel. And then airline travel is completely different as well.
So I would say about 2 years ago, you were in New York and I decided to fly down, and like typical Jamie Allen travel, we were already looking to how we were going to get in trouble on the airline. We were talking at the gate, you know, how many scotches we're going to have, all that stuff. And the mood changed. It changed for me and it changed for you. Why?
On that trip, it was, you know, I mean, every trip, when I get on and off an aircraft, I'm the first person on and I'm the last person off. So for all of you that like to carry all of your luggage onto the plane, you have probably hit me in the head, God knows how many times with your luggage, because I'm usually in the front seat. But I am the first one on and the last one off. They put me into a very small chair, an aisle chair, and it's really frustrating because the individuals that they send to help assist you usually are from 2 different countries and are not trained, and I have to try to get them to communicate to help me get to where I need to get safely. And I think, Jamie, that was the first time you ever really saw how they had to carry me on a plane, and to see what it's like to be really treated that way, because it's not a pretty sight to be treated like a piece of meat thrown on off a plane like that. And it's frustrating, and it's something that also I have to deal with on a regular basis every time I go somewhere.
So you did the explanation, you gave the adjectives. I'm not going to go any further, but I will tell you it was by far the most undignified thing I've ever seen on an airline, period. The second thing about airline travel, regardless of wheelchair, is you're switched and put onto one of these wheelchairs that fits in the aisle. How many times do you get your wheelchair in one piece on the other side?
Thank God I've only had 2 major problems, but it really is like a crapshoot. You know, you're giving them your wheelchair, which is a $30,000 machine, my wheelchair. And, you know, I wrap it up and take as many pieces off as I can and hand it over to them. And then, you know, usually from where I'm sitting on the plane, you can watch how they're handling it and you're trying to help them. But I've had a couple of times where I ended up in, it's kind of like Weekend at Bernie's with Alan, when the chair breaks and I end up somewhere where I have to just figure out how to get around without a wheelchair. And that's happened twice to me. And the airlines don't really have any universal way of handling this yet. And that's something that needs to be addressed on a bigger level.
So post New York City Marathon, you moved down to Florida because the weather was better, more accessible, and so on. With that, Daniel, what have you worked on since the marathon? What are the current issues that you see, and where have you already made differences, and where are we going to see differences, hopefully?
So, I happen to have some slides to help answer that question. So, a couple of things that, when Alan had his accident in New York, that kind of just we realized were unacceptable were the fact that there were no taxis that were accessible in New York, and the fact that we always talked about this. It seemed like the curb cuts in the streets, I always used to say, it seemed as though the city just said to people, go out and make a curb cut, but never explained that it actually needed to reach all the way down to the pavement or it would be useless. So that was a problem, and the taxis. And, I was lucky enough after doing that case where Alan was the plaintiff to ultimately start doing a lot of pro bono work, and got really lucky to get involved in some cases in New York City. So we did a case where we represented people in New York City who use wheelchairs, who might be impacted. At the time, it had to do with Hurricane Sandy. And I actually always forget whether it was Hurricane Irene or Hurricane Sandy was first. But after the first hurricane, we brought this case, and we alleged that there were no plans for people with disabilities. This was particularly the case because the subways are inaccessible. There's only 2 accessible seats on the buses. The taxis are inaccessible. So, what were the plans for people with disabilities? And an amazing thing kind of happened right before we were supposed to go to trial. And again, I forget, the next hurricane happened. So I think Sandy was second. Hurricane Sandy happened. It actually had to postpone the trial. And everything that we alleged in the case turned out to be true and became significant evidence in trial. We had one of the plaintiffs who basically alleged that he was in his house in Brooklyn. The water started pouring in, and he went out to the bus stop to really just flee the area, and there were no spots on the bus. He went back to his house. He literally was raising in the water in his apartment, banging on the ceiling, and was rescued. And we did settle that case with the creation of emergency plans in New York. We also sued to make the New York City taxi fleet accessible. Incredibly, as opposed to London, for example, where 99% of the taxis are accessible. Only, I think the number was 2.3% of the taxis were accessible. So we settled that case with an agreement, and you see the taxis out there now, to make 50% of the taxis wheelchair accessible. And then we got to bring a case on behalf of what I said were these curb cuts and the problems with that, and to get those fixed. And the city is finally fixing that. And then finally, the thing that I'm involved in, and incredibly, this is a fight that's been going on from way before, Alan even did the marathon from the early 70s. And it's the fact that the subway system in New York City remains largely inaccessible. Only about a quarter of the subways have elevator access, and we're involved in about 3 lawsuits regarding that issue.
So I'm just going to go off script a little. Daniel, as the ADA came into being with George Bush, what things are people very strict about? In other words, the rules that are there are set, they're rules, requirements, and what things do you still see need a lot of improvement?
So I'm glad to say, and I think Alan would agree, that the difference between physical access back in 1990 before the ADA and today is much, much better. I recall really with Alan, like we couldn't get in anywhere. You couldn't get in anywhere, had to lift up. I remember his friends carrying the wheelchair or going in the back. Physical access has certainly gotten better, but there's still a lot of things people just don't think about. In terms of physical access, it needs to be thought about, particularly when you're building a new thing. There, of course, still is a lot of discrimination in the area of, invisible disabilities and mental disabilities. I think that's something you barely hear about. It's only finally being spoken about now. So there's always a lot of work to be done, unfortunately.
Okay, Alan, question for you. When you come to New York, have you been in one of the accessible cabs, and what is it like?
New York is the best city. New York and Las Vegas, the two best cities for taxis, because there's an app that I can go onto and I actually feel like a human being in New York, not having to worry about how I'm getting around, as opposed to other places where I really have to plan in advance. So the fact that the work that Daniel did and everybody else to kind of, make New York City the leader of, accessibility in the United States when it comes to taxis is great. And this needs to happen in other states. It needs to start trickling through to the rest of the country because, it's not fair, like I said, when I travel, not to be able to just hail a taxi cab like anybody else. They really have to, pay more money just because I'm in a chair to get transportation. I mean, that's kind of what living with a disability is. Pay more to do more because of things not being accessible. And I think something also important that Daniel, you kind of just brought up is, people look at, a disability sign and they see the wheelchair on it, or, Jamie, this came up in one of the webinars you had the other day, there's the one for hearing, but there are so many people with disabilities of different, different types. And we need to be here as a crew for everybody, because without community, things don't get done. And that's something that we all know is being part of Ramaz and KJ, and listening to Rabbi Lookstein and Josh last week talk about how important community is. Lead by example, don't take no for an answer, and always try to make sure that you're thinking of others before yourself.
So one of the interesting things that Daniel brought up and Alan, you touched upon regarding hotels and the like, is one of the things and programs that we're doing in Israel, and obviously us helping get it out to the world through Friends of Access Israel, is the idea of pre-planning with architects. When buildings go up, there should be inclusion, awareness should be part of the plan. It shouldn't be, oh, we put up the building and then we make it accessible. And I think one of the great examples, pre-ADA, to the credit, not required by the ADA yet, because Daniel hasn't done anything about it yet, but he will. But synagogues do not, or places of worship do not require to be accessible. What did Rabbi Lookstein do in KJ?
He in the beginning when I first got hurt, and for those of you who remember the old shul, I used to have to go up the little elevator and then get a group of guys to carry me up into shul. And I think that Rabbi Lookstein started to really see how that affected me wanting to go to shul. And he did something about it, and he broke a hole into the wall from the auditorium over to make sure that there was more dignified place for me to go, and not to feel that I had to go there and have 5 men run out of shul and pick me up and carry me down, which was, for all the kids would come over and watch and see, and it didn't really bother me that much, but it bothered me that it inconvenienced others, and that it also it was not the right message. It was a way around it as opposed to handling it head on. And, when you were just talking about building from the base up, if anybody is building anything now, you should look into something called universal design, which is where your house would be built accessible. A lot of people think it's great to have that step to go up and over into the shower, but as you get older, that becomes more difficult. So there are ways just to kind of build things and make things accessible and use technology to make one's life easier.
So before we go to questions, I'm going to go back to you, Daniel, and I'm just scrolling through. Give me 1 second. And he is. Rabbi Lookstein is on. We were all students when Rabbi Lookstein was principal of Ramaz. Why don't you share what Rabbi Lookstein taught you, what our fathers taught us, and then I'm going to go to you, Daniel.
Are you going to me first?
Yeah,
Okay, what did I
because
learn?
once you start crying, we all start crying. Then we don't have to talk, Daniel and I.
You know, it's actually, you know, Rabbi Lookstein. I'm going to go to Rabbi Joseph Lookstein because I remember Rabbi Joseph Lookstein and my grandparents being extremely friendly and going back that far. So I remember sitting in shul, looking up at him and being in awe. And then Rabbi, you know, Haskel, obviously, going to giant games with him and Josh, and him teaching my dad bar mitzvah lessons, and father and son minyan, and him, you know, bar mitzvahing me in the shul, and just growing up in our synagogue, you know, Janie, you know, you and I being part of the chevra, which I, you know, was something that we did very quietly, and quiet mitzvot was what I was taught to do. But when you break your neck, things don't become very quiet. So, you know, I decided that I had to just, like I said, go out there and be bold on behalf of the the people living with any sort of disability. And Ramaz and KJ made me who I am and what I am. And I remember the night before my dad's funeral, when the rabbi said to me, you know, you need to write stuff down and you need to, you know, make sure you have this all, you know, squared away. And I was sitting the night before thinking it all through. And there's one line that kept coming to me, and it's become kind of a mantra. And I know Haskel uses it as well, is because that's what we do. And that's when my father, you know, he would say that to us all the time. Why do we have to do this? Why do you have to do that? And it wasn't really a question. That's what we learned in Ramaz and KJ, is because that's what we do. We help others, and it doesn't have to be a very public thing. It could be very privately. I know my mom speaks to so many families and individuals that, you know, who are worlds are turned upside down, and we get a phone call, and we all, as a family, the Brown family, has learned to take the negative thing that happened to me and turn it into a positive to help others. And that's what we learned from being in KJ and being in Ramaz, is to give back. And it's not about what you receive, it's about what you give.
Daniel?
So it's interesting that Alan mentioned, and I'm so honored that to hear that Rabbi Lookstein is on. It's interesting to Alan to hear about doing things quietly, which certainly Rabbi Lookstein, who, as we all know, is also known as Rab Chesed, does so many things quietly. But my memory is much different, and I certainly have become an advocate in my life. You know, and when I see something wrong, I feel an obligation to speak up, and I absolutely learned that from Ramaz and Rabbi Lookstein, and going to the Soviet embassy and marching in Washington. And I was actually looking for a quote before, and hopefully someone on this call could find it and send it to me. But I recall a quote by Rabbi Lookstein, something along the lines of, 1 hour of protesting at the Soviet embassy is worth a day in the classroom. I thought a lot of things also you could substitute for a day in the classroom, but in any event, I remembered that. And I also, when I was looking up, it was so cool to find that the New York Times reported on a sermon that Rabbi Lookstein gave in 1966, where he argued that the Talmud advocated principles similar to the civil rights movement. And I really do think that that advocacy I learned it in Ramaz, and it's always remained with me.
I'm going to add, there's so much to add about Ramaz and Rabbi Lookstein and what it has done for me. But I'll start with your dad. Mr. Brown was one of the crew that we used to travel to the West Side when we had to take care of, as my father would say, we never leave a soldier behind. When we did Taharas on the West Side, and we would always come back to either your house or my father's house to have a l'chaim, because we should end the evening on a positive note. We were not underage, but we were allowed to drink because my father said we could. But one of the interesting things that I will say about Alan and I, not about Daniel, because Daniel was much younger than I was, is Alan and I were not the best students. I certainly was not. But I had the opportunity to learn from Rabbi Lookstein, not necessarily by word, but by deed. Yibadel Chaim Tovim Ve'arukim. He's an outstanding orator like his father was. And yet he has taught me in deeds. I literally remember like yesterday, him leading by example, him calling Josh Kagan and I into his office, telling us, not asking, not, he already had approval, everything is taken care of, that we had to go in 1986 to the Soviet Union. We had to run Passover Sidarim there. And when I said Sidarim, I said 1 or 2. And he said it could be as many as 5 or 6. You have to realize that these are people that don't have what you have. And he taught us by deed how to answer the question of Hashomer Achi Anochi. Are we our brother and sister's keeper? And it wasn't yes by word, but very, very much by deed. So my sincere gratitude to Ramaz, to Rabbi Lookstein, and if there are any questions, you can certainly put them on. I just noticed that Rabbi Lookstein is on, but Daniel, Alan, we've caused a lot of trouble together, but so humbling to be on with this panel with you, and so happy that we can share what we are doing for others together. Good evening, Rabbi Lookstein. How are you?
Thank God. I'm shedding a few tears myself as you guys are crying, and I am bursting with pride and gratitude about the way in which you relate your education and your early experiences in shuls on the Upper East Side, because Jamie, you were an Or Chaim. You were a wonderful guest in KJ, but you were in Or Chaim with your father, Olav HaShalom, and Tibadel Chaim Tovim Varukim, your mother, and your grandparents. But to see the three of you devoting your lives to this cause, this sacred cause, is just tremendous in my eyes. The thing I'm really most impressed about in this webinar is Daniel in a suit and tie. I can't get over that, and I'm absolutely embarrassed to the point that I really didn't want to get on here. I don't have a tie on, and when I'm on these Zooms teaching a class or whatever it is, I put on a shirt and tie and a jacket. I can't say for sure what I'm wearing from the waist down, but from the waist up, I look like Daniel Brown. And if that isn't something special, that's something special. Dan, thank you very much. I thought you were going to say that you're wearing a tie and a jacket because you come from KJ and Ramaz. You said, no, my father always wore a suit. That's true.
Well, that's why he wore it. So
that's true. That's true. We all wore it growing up. But just to say seriously, thank God for this kind of a program, and thank God for the work that all of you are doing, each one slightly differently, to do chesed in this world. This is real chesed. And I'm proud of all of you, and my wife sitting here is also incredibly moved by what we've heard tonight and what we frankly know is going on way beyond tonight. And God should help you to continue to do good things. We're coming right up to Purim. V'nahafochu, Dan. Turn things upside down. That's exactly what happened on Purim. Turn things upside down so that people with disabilities should be able to live as normal a life as possible, and everybody else should participate in creating that normality for them.
Thank you, Rabbi Lookstein. And on behalf of Alan, Daniel, and I, the gratitude goes to you and to the school that you and your beloved father built with the help of your spouses as well. I know that we are all who we are because of Ramaz. And with that, Kenny, thank you so much for a great evening.
I cannot begin to tell you, for everyone that has been on this evening, how absolutely special this opportunity to hear the three of you speak together with one another, and to hear what you're doing in the work. We're hearing a lot in the comments, in the chats, and in the questions and answers, and I have a feeling we'll be hearing for a long time how proud everyone is of the work you're doing. Jamie, could you also, before we go off, tell us how do people get involved with Access Israel? How can they be in contact with Access Israel? Because I know there are people that are interested based on this evening.
Okay, so one of the things that you do when you're talking on a program where people may have disabilities, describe where you are, and we forgot to do that. So our bad. So over my left shoulder is a sign that says www.phaser.org. You can reach me at Jamie, Jamie, at phaser.org, or Alan at phaser.org. And, you know, we'd love for you to get involved. We're doing disability has no barriers, and we are able to work together as a team to do whatever we have to do. So I welcome people to join us, follow us on social media. This past month, just as an addition, we had 16 different people with various abilities, from a Paralympian to today. We had Yariv Bosch of Space IL, who put the rocket on the moon, or almost the rocket on the moon, for the state of Israel. And it was remarkable. So definitely join us, definitely reach out to us. We work together. We are one big, we work together for good, and off Zoom, I won't tell you what we do.
I know what you do off screen as well as on, and we're very proud of all of it. I want to also, just before we end, Jonathan Cannon, our head of school, who is not on the panel, but he sent a beautiful message that it's such an honor to be part of the Ramaz community. He said that he listed in your narrative of how your experiences in partnership, that you make such a difference, and it inspires us to continue to prioritize at Ramaz Chesed, and hope that our graduates will be able to accomplish some of, at least even a small amount of what you are and the role modeling that you do. So that was just, it was inspired by our current head of school, Jonathan Cannon. So
thank you.
That's a wonderful statement. I can't thank you enough, Jamie, Alan, and Daniel. Rabbi Lookstein, thank you for coming on at the last moment. As always, you are so flexible, even on even in a moment where you're not, when you're away. It's great to have so many of you on. Please continue to join us for our Zoom programming. We wish everybody on this evening a Freilichen Purim. I know it's going to be a little bit of a different Purim for most of us, and we should just, as Rabbi Lookstein said before, V'nahafochu, all that has happened in this year should be turned around, and we should have a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to celebrate and to enjoy our Purim. Hopefully as many of us as possible together, and those that can't be together to enjoy as much as we can separate and apart. There's wonderful programming going on both through KJ and Ramaz. Please tune into that programming and be a part of it so you can enjoy your Purim. Thank you all once again and have a wonderful night.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi. Chag Sameach.